Hello, everyone. We're live. When I don't have to see anyone, I don't have to talk to anyone. I mean, the other weekend, I just stayed in bed on the Sunday. I felt the same. I was so depleted.
Yes.
In fact, I'd been up to Howden, which is sort of Bronte country, isn't it? Chester, sort of
Yes.
up there.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, which was absolutely lovely.
What were you doing up there?
Well, I'm on Kit Duvall's 6-month writing course.
Oh, right.
And just the next day, I think we just got back and the long list was announced and she's on it
She's on the
with the
list.
best.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We all just like, oh my God, we're so
That's great.
excited.
Yeah, yeah.
So excited.
I mean, my shame, I
So,
haven't read any of the books on the long list. So I think maybe now that I'm getting a little bit less busy and I'm not writing at the moment, I just want to have
okay.
actually I want to have a reading year because I've got
Mm,
quite a lot of more events coming up. They're nicely spaced out now, but there isn't a month now between now and Christmas when I'm not going somewhere, and there's quite a bit of traveling involved. But as I said, I don't
wow.
mind if it's just once or twice a month. It's when it's all together, it's difficult. So I thought,
Yeah.
when I'm writing, I really need to be completely in the zone. I'm not a writer that can say, right, I'll do a few days now, then I'll go off and do something else, then I'll come back to it. When I start writing a novel, I have to be absolutely focused on that. Every morning I get up and that's what I do. And another friend of mine was talking about it last night. I went to a book launch, ML Stedman. I don't know if you know ML Stedman.
I know of her, but I don't know. I've never read anything.
She wrote The Light Between Oceans, which was made into a Steven Spielberg film.
Okay.
Um, and it's sold 5 million copies. 5
That's
million.
okay then.
5 million. I can't get over it.
God.
Anyway, I'm actually in a very small writing group with ML Stedman and two others. And
Wow.
the funny thing is that, well, it's not funny. I find it quite admirable. And I'm beginning to think maybe this is what I will do next time, is that I don't write, I don't think particularly fast. I know some authors I know seem to be able to churn out a book a year. And I know it seems as if I've done that recently because I had one book out last year, which was my Lord Byron murder mystery.
Mm.
And then suddenly, less than a year later, I had my latest novel out, which is completely different again. But actually, of course, I'd written those. I mean, I'd finished writing the one that's just out, Catherine, a retelling of Wuthering Heights. I finished that last February. And it wasn't actually due to be published until this coming October. But
But
suddenly with the film coming out and all the news of that, the marketing people were suddenly saying, we have to bring your book out at the same time. But they decided this in, I think it was the end of November last year. So bearing in mind we
whoa.
had Christmas
Okay.
and New Year in between,
Yeah.
we had no cover. We hadn't done the copy edits. Um, it was luckily it didn't need much structural edit wise. I still haven't been able to read the actual book in case I see copy edit mistakes. I just think, oh,
Don't worry, I've got it here. Where is she? I didn't see any. This is the proof, everyone. This is not the cover, but it is as beautiful. The first edition is as
it's
beautiful
very
as this.
beautiful.
I didn't spot a single typo.
Oh, thank goodness, thank
It's
goodness.
all right.
I mean, the thing is, you know what it's like. You go over it and over it and over it,
I do.
and you begin to your eyes practically bleed, and you just think, I can't see anything. And of course, a week later, you look and you see something straight away, and that's what horrifies me is that just the thought. I know other people are doing it, copying, editing it. Um, but funnily enough, there's been a big regarding copy editing. I don't know if you've been aware. I can't even think who it was, but I suddenly saw there was a lot of stuff going on. I think it must have been Twitter or Blue Sky recently when somebody had posted to say that, as far as she was concerned, anybody who was not traditionally published, um, which a lot of people obviously aren't now. A lot of people do it themselves, and it's fantastic. But she was saying, don't worry about copy editing. Don't spend your money on copy editing.
Oh my
It
God.
doesn't matter.
No.
And of course, lots of people were coming on saying, great, good for you. We agree. It's the story that matters. It doesn't really matter if there's a few mistakes. And then
I'm
somebody,
having palpitations
yeah,
as
well,
we
then
speak.
somebody else was coming on saying, no, it's really important. And, it seemed to turn into a massive thing. So,
I can see Andrew
I
Willie is also having a heart attack.
wondered what your views were on that.
Well, I gives me absolute palpitations whenever I'm talking to any emerging writers who are very much in the indie author self-pub zone, and that's the route they're going. I say to them, there's three things that you should really spend your money on: copy edit, and then good developmental edit as well. So a macro and a
Yeah,
micro,
yeah.
and then publicity. If you've got the resources, that's where you put your money, because marketing an author can do themselves. If you've got if you can just figure out Canva and you know what I mean, you can just create graphics and you can just flood the zone, and
Mm,
you can do all these. You can come up with some brilliant things. But a line edit, I mean, if I were
mm.
to pick up, anything that if the line edit hasn't been done, it just says to me that this author didn't care.
Well, one of the funny things is, and it's my bugbear, and it's something I am guilty of, and I notice it because what I always do when a book of mine comes out is I will download the Audible
Yeah,
and listen to the audio. You listen to the audio version, that's when you hear word repetitions.
yeah.
And do you know, even though I go over and over and over a manuscript, I've still picked up on 2 or 3 word repetitions, and thought to myself, I must make a note of that. And then, before the paperback comes out, hopefully we'll be able to change that. But I was listening to an A.S. Byatt the other day, and that had tons of word repetitions in the same sentences. I was amazed, actually. And then somebody else recently, so I thought, well, maybe it just happens, and maybe I'm just a little bit too obsessed with it.
Well, actually, I'm obsessed with it. I mean, I think I would hesitate. I would suspect with an AS Byatt that it was intentional, because I think word repetition can be used intentionally as a really strong device, and I think that can work really well. I think Hemingway does it really well as well. But I know for me, there are certain words which I really try not to use anymore because I use them again, and one of them is the word back. I seem to
Ah,
constantly have the she goes back, she sat back, she did back, back.
oh,
Just sort of,
okay.
will you just stop using that word? So I
Uh,
really try and
yeah,
yeah, because whenever I try not to repeat at all unless there's a device
exactly.
led
Unless you want to
intention.
emphasize something
Exactly.
particularly. Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, I'm
Mm,
really, even in anything, and even in an email, I try not to. So,
yeah.
but I read when I'm at edit stage. I read everything out loud as
Yes.
well to myself to hear those rhythms and all the rest of it.
Well,
But
I
can
don't do that so much, but what I do is I use the word speech in Word, and I use the voice voice
okay.
Oliver, because Oliver is the least robotic sounding. That's still the free version. And not bad, actually. It's not bad. So I listen to that, but sometimes because I know the text so well, I will speed it up to get through it quite quickly. And my husband will walk into the room sometimes, and all he can hear is it's quite funny. I'm picking up on it.
Funny.
But, um,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Wow,
the-
that's really interesting technique.
and
Andrew,
something else I
I've
think
never
is
even heard of Oliver. I'm checking him out. Yeah,
no,
go on.
he's good. He's good. He's not
Yeah.
bad at all. The rest are just
Okay.
way too robotic. Um,
Okay.
And another thing I do, which I think really, really does help for anybody, who's got to that stage when they're actually editing their first draft, is to, whether you use Word or any other sort of system, is to change the look of the template from portrait mode to
Yes. Yes.
change the background color of the page.
Yeah.
So I will change it to landscape, and I will make the background say cream instead of white. And simply by having a different interface, because I think your brain and your eyes get so used to looking at the same word on the same screen that you stop really noticing, because you're looking for what you think is there all the time. And sometimes you don't see what actually is there. And if you do that also, because the sentences then run much, much longer across the page,
Mm.
you read them differently, and you really get the sense of the flow of the language and the rhythm and the beat of it much, much better. So that's a really good trick, actually.
That's really interesting. And do you print out, because I find if I there's always a draft that I'll print it out and I'll read it on paper, and hopefully actually printed, like a book, so I'm reading it, because that helps me read it as if I haven't written it, and then I'm much more critical.
I don't always, but I did the last time with this one because we were so short on time in the end. We had
Yeah.
a few weeks to get everything sorted out, including
Oh my God. So
um,
you at the starting gun went off, and it came out Feb 15th, didn't it? So from November to Feb 15th. No, but you must have had, oh no, so when were the
came out the
galleys?
12th actually, which meant that
When
we
did
had,
the when
well,
did the galleys car arrive?
well, they printed those straight away. What we had to do was very, very quickly turn around, get a cover sorted out. And my publisher, he has a great designer, Mark Swan. He's really great.
Mm.
Really, he wasn't expecting to do anything until October. And in the end, I had been saving lots of images, which I often do because I used to work as a designer myself. So I think very visually about how I want a cover to look, and don't usually get what I want my cover to look like actually happening. Usually there's quite a lot of, accepting different ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a joint decision. But on this occasion, I'd saved some original uh, late 18th century book covers,
Mm.
which I copyright. And I had this one design, which was a totally different cover way to my book cover, and some of the elements were different, but I adapted it slightly using Photoshop and then sent it off to everybody else to see, and nobody was quite sure. But then Mark, the designer, tinkered with it, put a beautiful cover in, lovely typeface.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking here because there's a 3D. I'm just going to hold it up. There it is, right?
Yeah,
That's
so
back
I've
of
got
the
it here.
galley.
Is it going to be
There
back
you are.
front?
So beautiful.
It's
Oh.
it's really beautiful. It's so much. It's got double foiling, which you can't really see because I've got such
Mm.
lighting here. And then the spreads, and then it's got these gorgeous end papers.
End papers. Oh, it
And
is
then
exquisite.
what we've also done is we've got some ornaments, some
Lovely.
of the era, because when I say the era, I'm meaning late 1700s, early 1800s, because when it was written, Wuthering Heights was a historical novel. It was published in, the 1840s, but that's not when it's set. It begins in the sort of late 1700s. So we have these
Yeah, I've got my original
moments.
here. My
Yeah, oh,
Wuthering Heights.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got many versions behind me.
I bet you have. It's exquisite.
Mm.
And actually, on that, so you don't read when you're writing, but presumably, did you, how near the writing did you reread the original? Just talk me through the technical process of
Technical
a
process
retelling.
doing a
Yeah.
retelling, yes. Now,
Yeah.
all I just want to say, and I apologize with my hand on my heart to everybody, it is an audacious thing to do. It is an incredibly audacious thing to do, particularly for me, because Wuthering Heights is really my favorite book. And when you say favorite, lots of people say, how could it be your favorite? It's full of horrible people doing horrible things. Yes, that's true. But I feel for me, it's the book that draws me in, and the book that I keep wanting to go back and reread. And I do reread it every few years. But I first
Mm.
read it when I was 17. And however, it was in my head before then, because when I was about 6 or 7 years old, my father and my mother had separated. My father had left home, and my mother, he was very young. She only had me. She was 21 when she had me, so she was still very young.
Wow.
And I was about 6 or 7 years old, and she used to let me stay up with her and watch films on TV. And I remember vividly watching one film with her, and obviously most of it would have gone over my head. But I do remember seeing this old black and white version of Wuthering Heights with Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon.
Mm.
And the early scenes, there were three things really which stayed with me from that time onwards. And although, at that age, you don't understand the nuances of the emotion and the violence and the brutality, but you do feel things in your heart. And first of all, that early scenes when Mr. Lockwood arrives, and it's really done well in that film, when he wakes up and the fir trees are banging on the window of the box bed, and the windows, just accessible from the box bed in which he's sleeping, which was Kathy's old bed. And then does he dream it, or does he actually see this hand knocking, or is it just the the
The branches.
branches of the fir tree, but it's vividly done and it's so good. And that really stayed with me. And then what also I think stayed with me were the children. The scenes with the children were very well done. And being a child myself then, and those children being about that age, I just fell in love with those early scenes of Cathy meeting Heathcliff and, what they did, and then the brutality of Hindley, her brother. And I suppose there were four things actually. The third thing being Cathy's death, which was terribly moving, and the final thing being in that film when they're both dead, a scene when you can just see these very vague, hazy silhouettes walking away across the moors towards Penistone Crag. And all of those things really stayed with me. How I came to do retelling, I suppose it's always been in my mind. I read it when I was 17, the book itself. I didn't do it at school. It wasn't one of our texts that we studied. But my husband now bought me that book. It's a beautiful leather-bound one with golden spreads, and that was a birthday present he bought me. And even then, reading that, I think I read it and got to the point of Cathy's death, and I remember my sofa. I remember where I was in my parents' house, sitting on my sofa, in floods of tears.
Yeah.
Cathy's death. After that, sort of thinking, oh, I'm not really interested in you. Really tedious and horrible, and they're arguing all the time, and Heathcliff suddenly become a horrible person. And at that point, then when I was 17, those other aspects of the novel didn't interest me so much. But since then, I've come to realize that the second part of the novel is like a mirror to the first part of the novel, and it's really vital to the redemption of all the sins and the bad things that happen in the first part, which hopefully become resolved in the second. And so when doing a retelling, I'd reread that again many times. I do remember how I decided to do this book. So about 2 years ago, I was in my bedroom upstairs one day, and I'd finished my Byron mystery, and I was thinking about doing another follow-up to that. And I just suddenly glimpsed one of my copies of Wuthering Heights, which I had just started to read again. And I just emailed my agent, David Headley, and said, "What do you think, David? A retelling of Wuthering Heights from the point of view of Cathy as a ghost?" And he immediately came back and said, "Yes, please do it. When can you let me have it?" So I just very rashly said, "Oh, a year. I think a year." For me is quite short, because usually I take at least 18 months. So I write historical novels. So I like to take about 6 months on my research, and then I start writing. And because I don't plot a book, it can take ages because I keep going down the wrong blind alleys and having to come back again. So having done that, I thought, oh God, I've got to do it now. So I did another really close read of the book. And I started to notice all of the gaps, as it were, for me, all the places where in between Nellie Dean's, who does the main narrative, we have Lockwood sort of bookending it with his own version. But Nellie Dean, who I'm sure everybody knows the story, but for those who don't, has been a servant at Wuthering Heights while Cathy and Heathcliff are growing up, and then follows Cathy. Cathy insists, or Cathy's brother insists, that she goes to Thrushcross Grange when Cathy marries Edgar Linton. So she's always there with Cathy during her lifetime. And then she looks after Cathy's daughter, who's another Cathy, very confusing, when Cathy dies in childbirth. So she is overseeing the entire story of the two halves of the novel and telling the story to Mr. Lockwood. So I suppose I just read it really closely, and everywhere where Nellie Dean perhaps wasn't present to see or hear what Cathy and Heathcliff were doing, if it was possible for me to weave something into those gaps, then I did. And I just found lots and lots of spaces. But what I wanted to do, and it was really important to me, was to be incredibly faithful to the original narrative, because I do love it. It's always a sacred text, but to me it almost is. I wouldn't try to change that the main beats of that story. They are crucial to it. So what I did is I followed those. I'd done a very linear sort of version as Catherine's ghost rises from her grave and then looks back on her childhood, and we follow the whole story through. Um, but just basically woven things that happened to her or happened to her and Heathcliff that nobody else could observe. And that's how I did it. And it just seemed to come very naturally and
Mm.
kept coming back to the main beats and making sure that how I wove those story narratives in absolutely worked with the main beats. And
Yeah.
and we're almost like another harmony going on in a musical composition, having an extra instrument playing, but the main tune is there.
Yeah, and actually, it really could be seen as a companion to the original in that sense that you are playing further notes, further harmonies and symphonies through it. So to me, it
Mm.
adds to the original. Um, I I did wonder, there was because I had to go back and look at the original text in that, which has Essie changed anything? Have you taken any liberties? Have you? I had a look, and there were only two things that I thought, was this in the original? I can remember. One of them was the circumstances of Heathcliff's death, how he died, and the other one was the truth about his parenting, his parentage.
That's definitely not in the original book. It's always left as
Mm.
a complete mystery.
Yeah,
The reason I have brought that in is partly because it's something which I always thought, where did he come from? I mean, one of
yeah, and there are hints. I have done quite a lot of research on it, and there's quite a lot of academic papers arguing that he clearly was Earnshaw's son. So
well, I think there are hints. There are definitely hints.
yeah,
And I think there are ideas that there were families in the neighbourhood when Emily Bronte was living in Haworth. Um, there was more than one big grand house in the area where it was said that a certain member of the family who was younger, who was like a cuckoo, had ended up wangling his way to get the inheritance or whatever. So there were these sort of stories
yeah,
going on which may have influenced her. But I think in the novel itself, one thing that's always struck me since I've been an adult reading it, I didn't notice when I was a teenager reading it, but as I got older, I think this is the absolute incredible genius of Wuthering Heights, and I do think it is genius, is that for a young woman who died, when she was 30, to have had the understanding of the human condition in all its forms that she did. Of course, being a parson's daughter, I'm sure that she saw lots of problems and lots of troubles, and she was certainly well aware of people dying very suddenly, not only within her own family, where, of course, so many members of the family died, and they all died so young. Um, and poor health was very common in Haworth, where the average age of death in adults was 25. 25. I had to
wow,
that many times because I kept thinking, "Is that right?" But it is right. And so her father would have been as involved in performing funerals all the time as he would have been in christenings. But of course, apart from that, I know that he would have been visited by parishioners with problems. And I know at one point, there's one story that, on one occasion, a woman came along to visit the parsonage in a great distress one night because her husband abused her. He was a drunkard. He beat her up. He was very violent and abusive, and she had children. And normally in that day and age, she would have been told, you are married, because she was her husband's property.
yeah,
She would have no right to her children. She would have no right to anything. But
mm.
actually Patrick Bronte, Emily's father, told her to leave her husband and go and make a life on her own, which she did with her children and very successfully. But that was very, very forward
It's
thinking
very
to
radical.
do that. But of course,
Wow,
there is that sort of um, violence and drunkenness and abuse within a family in Wuthering Heights. But she would also have seen that at very close range at home because her brother Branwell, who tragically also died very young, um, when they were children, he was almost at the center of their writing and their imagined other lands in Glasstown and Gondal and Angria, and they wrote these little books, and they had all these characters based on toy soldiers. And ever since they were little children, Emily, Anne, Charlotte, and Bramwell created these imaginary worlds. And so they were kind of honing their craft and their characterizations and their setting and everything like that. They used to live, eat, and dream these stories. I mean, they really did put themselves into it. And I can't even remember what the main question was now. I've rambled on.
No, but it's certainly what. But it's certainly what gives it the depth, isn't it? That they're of the original, but then also it echoed in yours, because there's such depth of nuance of feeling.
Yes, and we were talking about, Heathcliff, weren't we? Was he Mr. Enshaw's son? And what
exactly.
I was going to say is, one of the things in the book that I really pick up on now when I read it is when he first brings him back. Now, first of all, he's gone to Liverpool in the middle of the harvest. He has a big farming estate. You don't leave your farm in the middle of the harvest. You just don't do it. He claims he's walked to Liverpool and back in 3 days. It's 60 miles away. And to have done that, and then also have the time to do whatever business he claims he'd gone to do in Liverpool. He claims he went on business. What business, we never know. And then he comes home with this child. Now, first of all, the child is called It by everyone because he's dirty and grimy. He can hardly speak. Mr. Earnshaw says he's an orphan he found on the streets, and he tried to find whoever It belonged to, but couldn't. So he just brought him home. But the thing is that when they decide to name the little boy, they call him Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is also the name of a child that was born to Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw before Hareton and Cathy were born. So their firstborn, basically, who died, was called Heathcliff. Isn't it a little bit coincidental? Would you call a beggar child that had no family connection? Would you call him by the same name as a baby of your own flesh and blood that had died? Whereas in families, it is very common at that time to call children by the same name if they died, or to call, a father, to give a son a father's name, or a daughter a mother's name, as in Cathy. But to me, that seemed like a big hint.
Yeah.
And the fact that he is favoured by Mr. Earnshaw and Mrs. Earnshaw, who is there, and suddenly she's not. She dies very quickly early on in the novel, but she very much takes her son Hindley's side and kind of fosters Hindley's animosity. And I feel that, one thing I did try to do in the novel actually was try to think really hard about all the characters and their motivations and characterization. And so I've added quite a lot of scenes around the death of Mrs. Earnshaw and the impact that has on Hindley as well as Cathy. Cathy less so, because she's only about 5-6 years, a little bit older than that then. But Hindley, his champion, the woman that really cares for him in the house, is suddenly gone. And I thought about Branwell, who had lost his mother, lost his older sister Maria, who he absolutely adored, and ended up becoming drunk, addicted to opiates, and basically, just becoming abusive and making everyone's life a misery. And tragically, everything he turned his hand to failing, because he on the one hand had great hopes and great dreams, but because of the flaws in his character, that didn't happen. And then he got very ill and he died. And I just think he imagined living in the parsonage, which isn't that big a house, with somebody who's behaving like that all the time. It must have been hell. It must have been so hard. So I think Emily and her sisters were so very well aware of the impact of living with someone in that sort of situation. I think that Anne Bronte wrote about it as well. And I just do feel that they really understood the realities of life. They really weren't sheltered, completely ignorant, young, well-to-do daughters of a parson. They really saw real life.
Yeah, they were realists, and it certainly ups the ante in terms of emotional pressure if we let ourselves imagine that secretly Heathcliff was Earnshaw's, hidden bastard son, doesn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, and that everybody knew, but it's never spoken. I think it's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
sort of more fascinating that Emily didn't, that she really left it. She doesn't even leave it. I mean, those little hints are there, but there's nothing in the text that I can identify where she is actively pointing. I mean, it's so left,
It's very
isn't
subtle,
it?
and I think
Very
to
subtle.
decide
Yeah.
for ourselves whether we feel that's what she really meant or not, or,
Yeah. I mean, how
you
can
know,
we know?
maybe Mr. Earnshaw just saw something in this child that reminded him of his firstborn. It could be that. It's all very subtle. Um,
Mm,
but I decided to go with that, and so I developed
mm.
a very briefly told in my novel. I mean, it could become another novel all its own, but,
Well,
um
I had to reread that bit just to check I hadn't misread it, because you do really just, it suddenly is like, whoa, hang on, did I just read that? I
Yeah,
had to go back
because
and read it
because
again.
what
I
I
read it sort
did
of
is,
three times to be
yeah,
sure.
and I had to decide how to do that and how to
Mm,
drop that information, and I got to a point in the novel where the only place I felt it could be was a certain scene when, basically Cathy has come down to the kitchen at Thrushcross Grange. She's married, and Nellie Dean is looking through the window and sees Heathcliff kissing Isabella, so that's Cathy's sister-in-law, and who's got a big crush on him. And then he comes into the kitchen, and while Nellie Dean is out of the room, Cathy challenges him on that and, accuses him of trying to make her jealous, and why is he doing this? And he explains, look, I've come back. I wanted you to come away with me. You're dangling me on the string. You have not come away with me, and now you're pregnant. And if you won't come away with me, then I will take Isabella. I will basically get my revenge that way. At which point, she says, well, do you really want her? Do you really love her? And he says, no, I would rather cut my throat than marry Isabella. But if you force me to do that, I'll do that. And at that point in the novel, I thought the emotions are really heightened here. It's a point when almost you feel Cathy could have said, I will come away with you. She could
yeah,
have done that then.
I know.
He's trying to force her hand. He's really trying to force her hand at that point. And it's all quite done quite subtly and quickly, and in the book, there's a very active physical scene when her husband comes into the room, and there's quite a lot of rough and tumble. And so I thought, well, before the others come back in the room, I want her to say, where did you go? Because there are times when Nellie Dean is speaking to Cathy and Isabella, and she says, do you not think it's strange where he got his wealth from? Do you not think I think there's something
Yeah,
bad going on. I don't think it's come by well. I think he's been up to no good. And so in this scene, I have Cathy saying to him, well, where have you been? Where have you got your wealth? And he then very quickly tells her, because then the others come back into the room. So I wanted to get those facts over. I just wanted it to be something that was almost as if, we were Cathy listening to that, and you listen to something like that, and when people say something to you which is so unexpected and so shocking, you can't take it in.
yeah.
So it's
That's
late.
exactly what happened when I
Yeah.
read it.
So it's later
Yeah,
on she's thinking, she's going mad. It drives her mad, that
yeah,
knowledge that she
yeah. Well,
learned.
well, yes, because to be in love with your half sister. Well, now, okay, now we've got so much more explanation for the tearing, impossible
Mm.
hate, love,
But I also
passion
I
between
wanted
them.
to give extra reason for the fact that, Cathy, when Heathcliff does elope with Isabella, which he does soon after that,
Mm,
um, Cathy has fainted also during that scene. She faints, and I thought, it's got to be something really, really extreme that makes her faint, that drives her to
yeah,
the point of distraction. Because, Heathcliff's come back some time ago, and she's obviously been in a state of torment all the time, meeting up with him, although, also having her cake and eating it. Um, but because I think that's the puzzle of Cathy, is that she does she does have such a bond with Heathcliff, an obsession, a feeling that they are, the same person, because they've grown up.
mm,
They've been very,
yeah,
very close as children. And I think
yeah,
form that sort of bond with someone, it's always there.
yeah.
But she also does enjoy the privileges of being the
The
wife of a
luxury.
wealthy man. And I think that one thing I do feel very strongly, I think if it was very, very clever of Emily Bronte to have Cathy just pregnant, just before Heathcliff comes back. Because I wonder if he'd come back and she wasn't pregnant, maybe she would have gone off with him. Because he's quite a Byronic character. The Brontes were very well read, and also, as females in that day and age, well read in areas that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be. But their father Patrick did do a lot of homeschooling, and he let them read all the books on his shelves. So they'd read everything to do with Byron. They knew all about him. They'd read articles in magazines. They'd heard all the gossip and the scandal about Byron. And actually, I think Heathcliff is quite Byronic. So is Mr.
Mm.
Webster.
Yeah.
Um, I think in the Tenant of Wildfell Hall as well, the
Yeah.
husband is very Byronic.
Yeah.
Plus Branwelly, with the drinking and everything. But so all these things I think it was really important to bring into it. But I wanted to really, really heighten that drama and the emotion to explain Cathy's total sinking into a sort of delirium when
Mm.
Heathcliff goes off with Isabella. She does have a sort of mini delirium when Heathcliff first disappears, when he overhears her in the kitchen asking Nellie Dean whether or not she should marry
Yeah.
Linton, and he goes before he hears her saying that she loves him,
Yeah. She
like
only hears her say
the
that
rock,
marrying
whereas
him will be
yeah.
degrading.
Um,
Yeah.
and so she does, and Emily does mention after those scenes that the doctor says that from that point on she must be allowed to have her own way in everything. She must not be challenged, because if she becomes overwrought again, she might literally go mad. So we have that foreshadowing, and then that sort of does happen when Heathcliff disappears again. I think that really does send Cathy into a terrible state. Plus, she's about 7 months pregnant. I wondered, did she have, high blood pressure, preeclampsia, that sort of.
Preeclampsia. That's what I always think.
That
Yeah.
struck me that she may have had that.
Yeah.
And so, just trying to read through all the little things between the lines and then feed into those and add extra drama, because I think it would have been quite difficult for Emily Bronte to actually be more explicit about Heathcliff's background. And maybe I think probably she very deliberately wanted to keep that as a mystery. To some extent, that as a mystery does totally work. But I wanted to add a little bit more that way. And having read a lot, about the possibilities, Liverpool was a place where there would have been a lot of Black African slaves. There would have also been the more Asiatic Lascars, the workers on the ships. Lots and lots of different mingling of races. And one thing again that Emily does, which is really clever, is she doesn't pin Heathcliff's race down.
Yeah.
He's described at one point as being a gypsy, a filthy gypsy.
Yeah.
A little Lascar, one of those runaway African slaves. And then there's a scene, the Christmas scene, when they're still quite young children, early teens, when Cathy invites the Lintons for Christmas at Wuthering Heights. And Heathcliff isn't invited, but Nellie Dean gets him to wash and put some clean clothes on. And she tells him, I think, if I get it right, that his father could have been an Indian prince. His mother might have been, or a Queen of China. His mother and his father could have been an Indian prince. I may have got this the wrong way around, but so you've got all those different Asia, Indian, China, Africa,
Caribbean, Africa, exactly. That was the impression.
He could have been an Irish. They used to call Irish black because they did not have black skin, but they had very dark hair, and perhaps quite Spanish looking, because you had a lot of Spanish coming into Ireland at one point. So, there's all these different possibilities. One thing we know is that she deliberately doesn't pin him down to one particular race, because Nellie Dean does say at one point, and forgive me here, this is what it says in the book. She says to Heathcliff, if you were a regular black, it would be easier to see why you are being treated like this. So she uses that term, regular black. So we know he's dark-skinned, black-haired, dark-eyed, but what's really important is his otherness.
Mm. Yeah.
And he is constantly othered, and the race is so important in this book, which is
Mm.
one thing that I was a little bit disappointed about the film. I don't know if you've seen the film.
I saw it a couple of nights ago.
And
Yeah.
I thought, "Oh, where's the racism?" Because this is so important. It's so vital to the brutality because, this is as much important to Heathcliff's behaviour and his absolutely horrific behaviour in the second part of the book because he is constantly being pushed out something different. I suppose what Emerald Fennell's done
Mm.
is used wealth, is used economy and
As her otherness. Yeah, I'd love to interview Emerald Fennell and ask her specifically that question because it would seem, I mean, she varies a lot from the text, and I will, if we have time, I want to ask you. Have you seen it? Have you seen the film? Yeah. So she obviously does, but that's an interesting choice she's made, to not to cast Heathcliff as a white. That seems like an interesting choice. But yes, she's used economics as her othering instead. But throughout your novel and through the original Wuthering Heights, there is a beautiful darkness in weather, in tempestuous, in feeling, in passion, and particularly, and this is I just wanted to get to this and the choices you made of how to get into the story, because obviously Emily Bronte gets into the story through Lockwood, and you made your choices getting into the story. How do I get in there? And I just absolutely loved. It was so visceral, this opening of being in the grave. Again, the darkness and the earth and the soil and the movement. And there's this wonderful bright strip of red coming from somewhere. And this is how we as readers get into the story. Just talk me through, as you thought about how I enter this story and tell it.
okay.
What were your
Well, on my various readings of Wuthering Heights, um, and again, it's something which didn't always strike me in initial readings. I mean, I obviously picked up on it, but on one of a more recent reading, coming to a point, it's very late in the novel when Heathcliff is beginning to realise that all his attempts to make everybody's life a misery are failing because the two main people he's trying to ruin are falling in love, and they are going to, that's the redemption, the circle turned, as it were. And he's talking to Nellie Dean, and he's telling her, the night that her husband died, he's talking about Catherine, the night when Edgar Linton died. So this is sort of some nearly 20 years after Kathy dies, her husband dies. Her daughter then is, the age that she was when she
yeah.
married and had her daughter. And he is telling Nellie Dean that the night before Edgar Linton's funeral, when he was obviously going to be buried in the same in churchyard as Kathy, Heathcliff went that night and bribed the sexton to let him dig up Kathy's grave when he was digging up, a plot next to her, and also asked the sexton if he would agree to break off one side of Kathy's coffin, and so that when Heathcliff dies, he would be buried on her other side. He's bribed the sexton to do this and to break off the side of his coffin so that Kathy and Heathcliff's mortal remains, as they rot, will mingle forever for eternity. But as well as that, he basically digs down through the soil and tells Nellie Dean that he wrenched the lid off her coffin. It's something he thought about doing the night after she was actually buried, so nearly 20 years before. But when he first tried to do that and he was digging down, he says that he was about to open the coffin, but he felt a brush of air on his cheek, and he felt
Mm.
certain that Kathy was there. And he then went back to Wuthering Heights across the moors to try and find her. And after that, he spent the next 20 years thinking he can hear her laughing on the moor. If she's not on the moor, he thinks he sees her in the house. Wherever he goes to find her, she's somewhere else. And it's like whether it's all in his head, he's been haunted by her all these years. But on this occasion, the night before Edgar's funeral, he does open up the lid of her coffin to look on her corpse. And Nellie Dean is horrified and says, "What did you expect to find? It would have been horrible." And he says, in whatever form she took, she could never repel me. But there's also the inference that the peaty soil on the moors, and this is actually scientifically true. I mean, bodies buried in that damp, peaty soil, whilst they're still in that and not exposed to the air, are often preserved.
Preserved.
And so the inference is that she was preserved. And the sexton, in my version, is saying, you better be careful because she'll change if the air gets to her. And I've used all of that. So I took that confession of his to Nellie Dean, which that is all it is, and it doesn't go into great detail. It doesn't need to. I mean, it's horrific enough in the inference that Emily does. Nellie is absolutely horrified. And actually, quite shortly after that, when she comes across Heathcliff in a dark room, not that long before he dies, she looks at him and she doesn't realize he's in the room, and she's got her candle and she suddenly sees him, and she feels he looks like a vampire or
Yeah.
a ghoul.
Yeah.
There's all these ideas that he's becoming something really ghoulish and really vampirish, which I think is very interesting. That with Wuthering Heights being such a gothic dark novel, although it's not a vampire novel, the whole idea of feeding on an obsessive love and eternal life is planting seeds there, and it's like a gateway novel, opening up, taking that space between Horace Walpole's Castle of Otranto with the Gothic weather and the lightning strikes and the crumbling buildings. We've got all of that in Wuthering Heights. It's all there. There's a wonderful scene just after Heathcliff disappears the first time, when Kathy's running outside screaming, looking for him and can't find him. And there's a storm and there's a sudden lightning strike and a tree next to the house is struck and it hits one of the chimneys and the chimney falls down. It's terribly dramatic. It's so Gothic. So all of that leading between that sort of first original Gothic novel, then we've got this Wuthering Heights, and it opens up for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Absolutely.
Another monster, the creation of a monster. So whether that creation of a monster is something that you physically do by taking a dead body and cutting it up and making another one, or something you do by abusing a child to such an extent that you make him a monster. And I really do believe that Heathcliff is made. Now, some people, I mean, some of us, not me, but some people are horribly abused as children. But luckily, they find people that love them, or they have it within themselves when they become adults to cope with that, to make new relationships which are happy and stable. But some people can't do that. And I think with Heathcliff being racially abused as well, being abused because of his class and because of his, presumably being a bastard and a beggar, it's just something he can't forgive.
Yeah, and I wonder if, had Kathy not said those things, or had he not overheard, and had she not married Linton, and had, in effect, the novel not taken place, and they had just been together, whether he or she would have been driven into that madness, or that would have been their moment of saving and rehabilitation. But there's certainly madness runs through but your novel, Emily's novel, the novel, without any doubt. And I mean, I saw, going back to the reading that Emily would have done, I felt there was lots of Greek myth in there. There was lots of Shakespearean tragedy in there. And then going forward, I spent a summer reading Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House, and also Stephen King's Pet Sematary, because both of those track from sanity to insanity. And they both, and again, in the same way that they clearly read Emily, they both do it in a way, although of course what you do it sort of almost more here, because we are inside Kathy, and certainly with The Haunting of Hill House and Pet Sematary, the brilliance of those and the brilliance of yours is that you are inside their minds as they're losing it, and in a way you don't realize until you get that camera pan back again.
It's funny, The Haunting of Hill House was again a film which I first saw before I read the book, and I saw The Haunting of Hill House when I was about 12 years old, and my brother and I, he's 2 years younger, so both of us much too young, used to creep out of bed on Friday night when my mum had gone out or had gone to bed. When I'm quite old, and in those days, at 10:30 on a Friday night, it was the horror films were shown. There'd be 2 or 3 horror films about 10:30, and Brian and I used to creep out of bed and put the telly on and quite quietly and sneak up, and we watched The Haunting one night. Oh my god! I mean, we that scene with the hand. Oh God.
Well, I couldn't. There's no way I could watch the film, but I can read. I can read horror, and I
Well,
still get
what I
haunted.
was
But
gonna say is what's really weird is I watched the film and then Brian and I had to sleep together that night, literally holding hands. We were terrified. I was even too terrified to go to the loo. I was just having to hold on to them for ages. I just, oh, really want to wee, but I can't. I don't want to go to the toilet. I might see something, or the doors might start bulging and
oh,
going bang, bang, bang.
stop it!
But when I read the novel when I was an adult, it's one of the only times when I've been reading a book and I had such a nightmare in the middle of the night, induced by that book. I remember waking up being absolutely terrified. I thought somebody was in the bed next to me, and my husband was away at the time, so it wasn't him. And um, it was, I was so totally immersed in that madness of the book. It really gets into you.
I mean, Shirley Jackson was haunted by her own. In effect, those books. I certainly The Haunting of Hill House sort of sent her mad as well.
Mm,
She became haunted by it. And funnily enough, although I want to ask you more about this, just before I had a little nap this afternoon, and I had the strangest dream. When I woke up, I just thought, okay, Essie's in the room. We're about to talk gothic horror because I dreamt that I dreamt that I woke up in my dreams. I thought I was awake, and all my cats were on the bed, including the one that died last year, who was exactly like the cat in Pet Cemetery, who came running up to me and had, I kid you not, earth on its back. So then I went back to sleep thinking I was awake. And I dreamt I was in a house where I was trying to go upstairs, but the staircases were moving. And I went up one staircase and the whole staircase had moved. I couldn't get to the top floor. And I looked up through these glass doors and a woman walked, this utterly gothic horror woman walked out of a room, not looking. And then I woke up and I was like, what
grief.
the
You're going to have
fuck
to
was
use
that?
this. You're going to have to put this in your writing. I mean, this is amazing. The thing about
I've never had a dream like that.
really the stairs thing is very interesting. Again, when I was about 5, because it was when my grandmother died, and I was 5 when she died, I was very close to her, and I can still remember a dream I had then. It was so vivid, and I remember in my dream I was in the living room in my my mum's living room at home, sitting on the sofa. I used to sit with my gran, and Gran wasn't there, and suddenly there was another door in the wall over there, which didn't exist in reality. And I got up and I walked through this door. There was a really long corridor ahead of me that just went, a very narrow corridor, just went on and on and on and on. As I walked down it, on the left, and it was on the left, I remember the wall on the right was solid. Every now and then on the left, there was a run of stairs that went up. Um,
Wow.
and they were all very high, and I couldn't. I was going up them and then going along more corridors and going, and I was looking for my gran and I couldn't find her.
Oh,
But this is makes it sound so sort of prosaic, and my explanation is I realised afterwards we used to play Snakes and Ladders a lot, the board game, which you're going up and down snakes and ladders, and I wonder if that influenced it. I don't know, but it was this horrible thing about these stairs, endless stairs, and
and searching.
stairs
And
are thing.
were you haunted when you were writing this? Did Kathy haunt you?
Yeah, I really, really, I was so engrossed in it, and and I didn't want to stop writing it.
Mm.
And you have to stop writing when you're writing a novel. I know. I mean, somebody once said to me, "It's never done. You've got to stop at some point. It's never done, but you've just
Yeah,
got to
yeah,
a point when you do finish it, because otherwise you'll
yeah,
just tinker forever."
yeah.
But even now, I am thinking, "Oh, I could have done this, and I could have done that, or I could have added this, and I could have added that." Um,
Mm.
and I haven't been able to write a word since I finished that novel.
Really?
Not a word. And I finished it a year ago, in February, so just over a year ago. It's really unlike me. Usually I have about 2 or 3 months which are fallow, and then suddenly I get bang an idea. And I've been writing now since 2011 or 2010, because I think my first novel was published in 2011. So I've been writing consistently since then, and I I have tons of ideas for novels. I've got a folder and I keep nearly every day I think, oh, I could write this, I could write that. Today I had a really, really funny idea today, based on somewhere I was earlier this morning. Um, and it's a great idea and it would work really well, but I have no interest in doing it. I have no interest in, because once I start writing a novel, I'm sure everybody here who writes feels the same. You do commit yourself to it. You become part of that world, and that world becomes
Yep.
your life.
A 100%.
You
Yeah.
know, totally.
Mm.
I can't dip in and out. I just can't do that.
Mm.
And I don't want to leave this world. I am still
Mm.
awed by it. And my agent's saying to me recently, what are you working on next? What are you working on next? And I think I'm just going to say, look, nothing this year, I don't think. I actually want to refill my well. I want to read more, but I'm reading, like, can you see this? I'm reading Emily Bronte Reappraised by the
Great.
Dr. Claire Callan. I've got stacks of Bronte books behind me. I don't have any intention of writing another anything else related. I've done this.
Okay.
My
Okay.
I feel it's very audacious, but it's not like, somebody was saying to me, "Oh, are you going to do another retelling of another classic novel?" I said, "Well, no, because this
No.
is the one that was in my heart. This is the one that has obsessed me all my life, and that's
Mm.
why I've done it.
Mm.
I'm not gonna turn it into a sort of machine.
No.
I don't want to do that."
No, and I know well that when I published my debut, I got lots of, "Oh, are you going to write a spin-off with leading with the other sisters and what happened to the ring?" And I was just like, "No, I
You've
don't.
done it.
I've done it. I don't want to write that. Maybe it'd be easy to market, but I still
Mhm.
don't want to write it, and I
Yeah.
didn't." And you know, and
Life is terribly, terribly short. It really is. And I think that if you are going to write and you're going to do it properly, it is a huge commitment on your time with no guarantee at the end of it. So, what I always say to people who say they want to write and they're going to write, and I say, do it because it's so rewarding, but do it for the joy of the creation and the writing. And the thing that I find when I first start on a new book, and I don't know if you get this or if anybody else who's listening does, is when I first get an idea and actually physically start tapping away on my computer, I get this buzz in my head. It's like buzz of excitement. It's almost like, literally, it's almost like, not like an electric shock, but it's almost like my brain is like really fizzing and I can feel energy. It's weird. Doesn't last the
yeah,
whole time. Um, but that excitement and that pleasure and that joy in creating another world, because that's what it's like, isn't it? You're living. So life is short, but what writing and creativity does, and art, the same, and music, is it gives us the ability to widen our lives, to live other lives.
mm, yeah, it does. I can never remember where the moment when I have the idea for everything I've ever written. I can never remember the moment when it came into my head. All I know is that one minute I'm doing something else, and the next minute I'm already writing it.
Yeah,
And I don't ever remember the bit where I had the idea. I don't
really.
know, never, no, never. But yeah, I
Oh, I always
absolutely.
do, because so often with me,
Mm.
actually, a lot of my books, particularly the early ones, were very much inspired by art. So I'd be in a museum or in an art gallery and I'd see an object or a painting, and I, like Elijah's Mermaid, which was my second novel. I'd been and I'd seen this painting by Waterhouse. It's called A Mermaid. It's a beautiful, beautiful painting, pre-Raphaelite, gorgeous blues, greens.
Mm.
And when my first novel sold and I went to meet my editor, Kate Mills, lovely Kate Mills, I was sat in her office and she said to me, "Well, it's a two-book deal. What's the next book?" I hadn't even thought about the next book. I'd
Yeah.
only, oh, and so I just, because I didn't want to seem unprepared or ridiculous, I just suddenly, off the top of my head, said, "Well, it's going to be about an artist, and he paints a mermaid, and then he paints her again and again and again." And she was terribly taken with this, so I had to go home and think, "Oh, I've got to write this novel now," and that just came to me like that. But from that painting, which just suddenly came into my head, the Somnambulist, my first one, that's based on a painting by Millet of a woman
Mm.
who's sleepwalking, because a somnambulist is a sleepwalker, and she's sleepwalking along the edge of a cliff. And that sort of inspired that whole thing, that and a visit to Wilton's Music Hall.
Okay.
And I have to say that maybe the kernel of my next book is with me now. I don't really know it, because I've got lots of ideas, as I said, and none of them have quite grabbed me enough to leave my Bronte world yet. But I was in Edinburgh, I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, I've lost track. And it was very, very wet. So we went to look around the museum in Edinburgh, which is fantastic. And when I came to one room, which was full of minerals, so there were, lumps of malachite, sulfur, things like that, amazing coloured minerals. And I suddenly thought, oh, alchemy and
Mm.
grinding up these stones and Dr. D. I am quite obsessed with Dr. D. Have you heard of him? He was, around the time of Elizabeth I, and he was
Mm.
he was a spy master. He was also a scholar, a very great scholar, but he was also an alchemist, and he was very much
Mm.
involved in trying to find the secret to eternal life through.
I know an alchemist, so if you do embark on that work,
Oh, really? Wow.
yeah, he's called Guy Ogilvy. I can put you in touch.
I'd love to. That would be great. Thank
Yeah,
you. Wow.
yeah, he's a scholar and an alchemist and a Sufi.
Oh. Ooh.
Yeah. I don't know why, but maybe because I loved it. The fascination is also in my brain. Do you remember the moment that came to you as well?
Well, that was a funny one because I had decided, and I had a year when I started to write 3 different books, and I would get to about 40 or 50,000 words in each of them, and then suddenly find out or see an announcement in the bookseller or receive an email with somebody saying, would you like to have a proof on this or that subject? And each time it was the book I was writing. So
Wow.
the first one was I started to write about, there was a man called Geoffrey Hudson who lived in the court of Charles Charles I. He was, or was it Charles II? Now I'm going mad. Charles I. And he was his Charles I's wife, Henrietta Maria, had in her court, she had a little court of freaks, like a freak show. So there was a giant and there was a very, very tiny man, Geoffrey Hudson, who was given to her as a child, as a gift. He was basically um, perfectly formed but tiny, just hadn't grown. And he was actually presented to her in a pie on a table and the crust of the pie was lifted up and this little boy came out. I mean,
God,
it's incredible, isn't it? I mean,
it's
beyond
incredible.
belief, beyond belief.
Yeah.
And I suddenly thought, oh my goodness. So I started to research into the life of this Geoffrey Hudson, and he'd stayed with the Queen all the time, and even when during the English Revolution, when she'd had to flee to France, he went to France with her, and he'd lived an amazing life, a very sad end, actually. So I started to write his story, and then I had an email from a publisher saying, we've got this proof we'd love you to read if you'd like to quote for it, and it's called The Smallest Man, and it's all about Geoffrey Hudson. And
No,
what
that's
chance is that?
extraordinary.
I really thought I'd hit something that was, nobody else would have thought about. And I can't remember what the next one was. There was another one. And then I started to thought I would write about a circus, a Victorian circus. And I started writing that. And then I got one of these emails saying, Elizabeth McNeil has written a book called The Circus of Wonders. And
God,
it's a Victorian book based on a circus. And I thought, oh my God.
God's
I don't know
sake.
what's going on here. This is just,
Yeah.
it was like all these ideas must have been in the ether, which I do
They were
think
in the ether. Oh, they absolutely. They fly back. That's why I
you
never
didn't grab
speak
them.
about what
What,
I'm
you grab
writing.
them. Don't take time to think about it.
Exactly.
Somebody else will
Yeah,
have it.
and don't tell anyone because then do you know what I mean? They might leap over to somebody else
Yeah.
until you've got
Well,
it
I
actually
was
done.
I was really depressed at that point, and then I had on Audible this book by Elizabeth. I can't remember her name now, but it was called Big Magic.
Elizabeth, come on, somebody. Liz Gilbert. Yeah.
And I was listening because I didn't like Eat, Pray, Love, but I thought, oh, I listened to this, and it was really interesting, and it was all about how where you get your ideas from, and it was the magic of actually like
Yeah.
alchemy in a way of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Yeah.
was saying at one point that she'd had a very, very good friend who was also a writer, but they used to meet up at literary festivals and they got on really well, and
Oh, I read about this.
yeah,
Go
and
on, tell everyone
seen
else.
each
But
other
yeah,
for
yeah,
a year, and they hadn't really talked about what they
yeah,
were writing. And when they next met up, they'd both written the same novel.
yeah, yeah. I know.
It's really unusual.
Extraordinary.
It was extraordinary
Yeah.
because it was based in the Amazon.
Yeah, it was very specific.
It was
I
really,
know.
and it was not something anything to do with their normal
No.
lives in
Life. No,
as
no.
it were. So
Yeah.
where on earth did that come from? And I suddenly thought, "Oh, yes, so that does happen."
Yeah, it
I'd
happens.
been feeling quite depressed about it all, and I remember I was doing the ironing, down in my kitchen, and I was listening to this Audible, and I suddenly thought, "Yeah, it happens." And then she was sort of saying, how you have to get over that, and you have to just start again and just go with what the flow and go with what it's nothing is wasted. It's never wasted because whatever you've written you can use in other ways. So I think I just had the realization about the circus of wonders then. So
Mm.
I thought, okay, I won't have a circus. I took the dog for a walk one day and I went down past the River Thames near where I live, across onto what they call the Brocas, which is where they used to have lots of they do have Mayfairs now. And I started to think it was during lockdown, so there was no Mayfair in COVID times. And I suddenly thought, oh, I wonder if they used to have Victorian fairs here because, the river being the main route for transport. And I started to have this idea about a narrow boat and visions of who might live in that narrow boat or travel in it.
Mm.
And then the fair, and then I thought about my childhood and the country lanes in Herefordshire, and there were lots of things I used from novels I'd started to write in the past that came to nothing, and it all amalgamated in the fascination. So
Yeah.
that was really strange. So I that's what I did. I set it in a sort of starting in a fairground rather than a circus, because the Victorian fairgrounds, when I started to research them, were absolutely fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
what I love about writing historical fiction is that once I start doing my research, and if you look at old Victoria, you can go online on the Times, the archives, and find amazing stories and reviews of things. But they used to do such vivid descriptions of things.
Mm. Yeah.
So the fairgrounds and the descriptions of the shows and like the waxwork models and everything, and all the different sort of booths and what they used to do. Absolutely, yeah, again, really gothic. And these
Yeah.
and I featured also a shop in Oxford Street, and it's based on one that really did exist. I didn't think up that myself. It was while I was doing some research, and I came across this place. I call it Summerwell's Museum, but it's based on one that was called Dr. Khan's Museum, and it was on Oxford Street. And you went into a shop, and in the front of the shop, it sold all sorts of things like dead frogs or stuffed birds or eggs or whatever, and lots of medicines, and there were lots of pamphlets on sexual health. And then you went through a curtained archway through an alley into the room at the back, which was an anatomy museum, which was a bit like
Wow.
going to Madame Tussauds now, but as well as just people, it was full of medical horrors, basically, which it was supposed to be educational, but it was really for titillation, and it was like going to the London Dungeons or some sort of horror show. And I
Wow.
just thought, wow, that really existed. And I read up on lots of that, and I thought this has to go into this novel. Um, and then the theatre as well. I brought the theatre into it because I absolutely I love the theatre, and I do
Yeah.
feel that writing is a bit like theatre. The dialogue. I love doing dialogue, but I love the creating the backdrops,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
scenery, um, and the whole drama of it all. I love the idea of theatre being behind the idea of creation of novels, but also I love the actual physical concept of theatre in all its
I
forms.
mean, you do it so well, and of everything I've read of yours, and with the feeling, and especially with this, because it's so much in my mind right now,
Mhm.
holding it up again, but we'll hold up the first editions, is the visceral experience of reading you, and the fascination that you hold as you go into all of these places. There's certainly on the moors in with Kathy, you really, as a reader, you pick up your absolute passion and depth within which you're there in the wild and the wind and the stone and the fire and hearing you talk about it now, it's no surprise to hear that passion and fascination, and throughout all of your descriptions of it, because it really comes through in the writing. It's brilliant. And it just, yeah, I think
It
it's,
is an obsession, I have to say. It's a total obsession.
yeah, well,
Where
but it means we get, because not everybody's got your brain and not everyone's got your talent, but we get to go into these places and they literally light up like theatres. It is like, it's like being in the theatrical movies when reading you, because you can do it and not everybody can do it, and you do it so well.
Oh, thank you.
Um, we've gone over time, of course we have, but what I really
Oh,
want to
wow.
make sure, yeah, I know, I really want to make sure where everybody knows. So, can you hold up Catherine a retelling for me so everybody can see
Yeah,
it, and can
yes.
you let everybody know where they can buy it? And where
Um,
else you'll be appearing, if you're appearing anywhere
oh
else that people can
gosh,
come and hear you
I
talk.
am appearing in lots of things. I can't. I don't know.
Or is it on your website? If they go to your
Yeah,
website.
it's on my website,
Okay,
and I need to
perfect.
update that because I've got more. But there's lots and lots of different things coming up through the year. I'm going to be
What's your website? essiefox.com.
essiefox.com.
And Catherine is available at all good and bad bookshops and online. Is there an Audible as well and an EPUB
There's a
and all of
great
that
Audible.
business?
There's an Audible
Great.
original they've done. It's really good. I mean, it's funny when we were trying to choose a reader. I had some quite firm ideas because I listen to loads of Audible, and I'm always very aware that if it's the wrong narrator, the book's ruined.
Ruined.
It's got to be right, and you don't want to be
Yeah,
thinking of the voice. You want to be thinking of the story,
that's
and
right.
to be right. So I sent them lots of ideas, but they came back and said, no, it's absolutely got to be a native Yorkshire speaker. How about this? And they sent me this, and it's great. And I can't remember her name just at the minute. Isabel. Anyway, it's
We can look it up. I'm
fantastic.
sure she's fabulous. Yeah.
And I listened to the whole thing because sometimes I have listened to some of my audiobooks and I haven't been able to listen to them. One of them in particular was narrated, and now I realize you can speed it up, but it was so low. Every
Oh,
single one.
oh.
Oh my God, we're going to be here at Christmas, and it's chapter
Yes.
one. And I can't imagine anybody listening to it without going mad. But some of them have been great. And I love this one definitely.
Can't wait. So, everybody, thanks everyone for joining us. You can get Essie's book absolutely everywhere. You can download the Audible, you can get the EPUB. And if you go onto Essie's website, essiefox.com, you'll see where she is appearing still. I'm sure you'll be at festivals throughout the summer.
I can't tell you back, but I am. I'm somewhere nearly every month or twice a month.
Great.
I'm going to
Great.
the Edinburgh Festival. I'm going to be at Capital Crime, but that's to do with my last book, which is my Byron murder mystery. Grantham, Bath, I think Leeds, Lincoln, all over the place, basically. So have a look at my website.
Fantastic.
You'll see. And hopefully, if it's someone near you, do come along. It would be great.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic, Essie. And I hope you also get some
Brighton as
rest.
well.
Brighton. Fantastic.
Yeah,
And
but
Edwin Earl has just ordered it. Hooray, Edwin Earl.
oh,
Thank
thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you. Mwah.
I hope in between all of that you get some rest. It does sound like you need to fill up your well as well. And perhaps, Kathy, perhaps writing this book, which feels as if you fell in love at 6 years old, this is a major piece of work for you in
Yeah,
your soul and in your spirit, isn't it? So I would imagine it's going to take quite a lot of time to
yeah.
breathe after Kathy. But thank you, Essie, for writing it.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
letting us into that world.
A lovely, lovely evening. Thank you. I've loved it. I was terribly nervous
Great.
beforehand, but there's no need.
There was no need. I always say it's just like me and you meet on a park bench and then the whole of Substack happens to be walking by. That's the way I see it.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Oh, loads of love, Essie. And I will see you hopefully IRL in real life soon and definitely in the
At
stacks.
your own book launch.
At my own book launch. Woohoo! Yes, exactly. Fantastic. Okay, great. I'll see you there. All right. Loads of love, Essie. Bye-bye. Bye.